Now on Enough Said with KFAN Radio's Dan Barrero, attorney and HoldingCourtPodcast.com's Ron Rosenbaum.
The Hennepin County Attorney's Office has concluded that criminal charges are not warranted against either Officer Mark Ringenberg or Officer Dustin Schwartz. The only thing I could think of to do was to save our lives and everyone else in the immediate area, so I pulled the trigger.
Because we're going to take to the streets, and we are going to fight until we get what we came for. And at the end of the day, that is freedom, justice, and equality.
Welcome back to Enough Said. My name's Dan Barrero, joined by Tom Lydon this week. We appreciate your help, sir.
Absolutely.
And Lori Fisher. Lori, let's get us started.
Hi, guys. Let's start with the decision in the Jamar Clark case. More than 4 months after the shooting, Hennepin County Attorney Mike Freeman announces there will not be charges against the officers involved. Dan?
Well, there's a lot to cover here. I would start with, you have more experience with this than me, but I was blown away with the thoroughness of what seemed to be released almost immediately and is still being released regarding his process. At the beginning, the concern was transparency. Right. This looks to me to be about as transparent as it could be. And it also looks to me as if we're in a situation where whatever opinion you had at the start of the process, you're probably going to stick with. But it looks as if in this case, this prosecutor, who I think did have the guts to take the case himself, followed the evidence and came to the only conclusion on the basis of the evidence that he could come to. I thought he did a terrific job start to finish in terms of attempting to lay out how he got to the conclusion that he did.
Right, and Hennepin County Attorney Mike Freeman is who you're talking about,
right.
And I agree. I think if there is any good thing to take out of this horribly tragic situation, it is that Hennepin County Attorney Mike Freeman really changed the game, taking it away from the grand jury, which in the last 16 years had not indicted 42 police officers.
Right.
And the officer-involved killings, a story that we did this week. I think he opened it up, and literally the evidence dump that we had after this case, hundreds of hours of videotape,
yeah.
transcripts. I've never seen anything like that. We would not have seen anything like this if it had gone to a grand jury. It would always have had this pall of secrecy over it. Maybe this is the new standard. That is the one hopeful thing that I think can come out of this. Why shouldn't this be the way it happens every time a person is killed by police?
Well, what I think what's sad about it, though, is, Ron and I talked about it, the decision he made, and it was hailed by a lot of people who were very worried about this case. But my concern then was, are they hailing that, or will they stop hailing it if they don't get the outcome they expect and they believe is the correct outcome? And sure enough, that's what's happened, because as you say, I think the protesters were very successful in sort of leading Freeman into the direction that this is how he went, as opposed to taking it to the grand jury. Right. But we didn't have the outcome that was expected by a lot of individuals, a lot of protesters. And let's talk, I mean, we have to remember here, the DNA evidence, unless, again, you believe, unless you don't want to trust anything.
Yeah. DNA on the gun, not on the handcuffs.
Correct.
And it was compelling, but it wasn't conclusive. And that's the way it always is. But, 61 seconds from start to finish. What bothers me is not the last 10 seconds, although it's disturbing,
right,
where the officers say they were forced to shoot Jamar Clark. What I find really disturbing is the 40 seconds leading up to it. From the moment these officers arrived on this scene, this situation escalated so out of hand, so quickly, in a department that loves to talk about de-escalation.
Sure.
That's not what happened here. And many people are going to wonder, where was the pepper spray? Where was the taser?
Tasers.
Why right off the bat did we engage in this takedown maneuver?
But as
I think
Freeman
those are
said,
legitimate questions.
They are fair questions. But as Freeman said, take your hands out of your pockets. You have to remember what came before. You had some emergency people who were saying, we're scared. We don't like the way this guy, to the point where they locked themselves in. And that's the other tragedy. New security techniques did not allow them to go from the back of the ambulance to the front. Right. And then they could have just left. And they were not able to do that because of that circumstance.
And I agree with you about hands in the pocket. Take your hands out of your pocket. But you know what, Dan? There are different cultural expectations right now when it comes to law enforcement. We have a disconnect with how officers are trained and how communities, especially about communities of color, how they expect to be treated.
Okay, enough said about the evidence. Let's move on to the response to the decision. Strong emotions. Take a listen.
Take care of one another. Watch out for one another. Make sure you hold each other accountable. Taking care of ourselves is the most important thing. Why? Because the police department has demonstrated that they won't take care of us.
Right. Today you push propaganda. And let me tell you, if the city burns, it's on your hands.
Very sad commentary there at the end.
Well, irresponsible.
Nobody
statement,
wins.
really.
And frankly, it would have been nice to hear from City Hall a little stronger response to it rather than kind of running scared to it. You cannot allow that sort of statement to stand. Fortunately, as far as I can tell, the demonstrations have been peaceful.
The demonstrations were peaceful, and I think Nakima Levy-Pounds, who's come under a lot of criticism, obviously from police, I'm not sure we would have had this level of transparency if her and the Black Lives Matter people and the people weren't out there pushing for it. But at City Hall, they had a press conference afterward. The police chief, Janae Harteau, the mayor, Betsy Hodges, and the council members behind them, they all looked scared.
Terrified.
And I know we have a Justice Department investigation still ongoing, lots of pieces yet to fall into place, but there was no leadership. There was no message. They have an inability to control the message on this thing, and they all looked,
from the beginning.
And they all looked, quite frankly, scared. And they're doing the right things in principle. We have a bunch of Justice Department programs about how to eliminate bias. We're getting body cams. We're doing some of the right things, but they are not projecting that message. They are. It's absolutely rudderless.
Well, part of this, as I said, is I think you can believe, like many of us do, I certainly do, that the system has been rigged against minorities in many ways. We've got a lot of cases across the country in which that has been demonstrably proven. But that doesn't necessarily mean you believe there was only one outcome here. We had this in Ferguson a little bit. The assumption was certain things were true, whether the evidence, in fact, confirmed that they were true. In that case, we not only had a local investigation, we had a federal investigation. And sadly, I think people get so committed to the cause that then there's not an ability to separate, well, yes, the cause is righteous, but do the facts really, or does the evidence confirm what we thought in these cases? And that's a sad place to me, where we get to that position.
Let's move to the big national talker. Republican presidential candidate Donald Trump under fire for what he said on MSNBC. The question, what to do if abortion becomes illegal in the U.S., and a woman still has the procedure. Take a listen.
As a principle, the answer is that there has to be some form of punishment.
For the woman?
Yeah, there has to be some form.
People misspeak all the time, and, you can't, but with him, everybody wants to make a bigger deal over it. I get it.
Hours later, Trump backtracks, saying it actually should be the doctor to be held responsible. His opponents are, of course, having a field day with this. Dan?
Well, it was an interesting clip because you could almost see Donald Trump, I don't think, had ever even thought about the question.
Hadn't gone down the process, no.
And which goes back to, as much as a lot of people like this non-politician, he was utterly unprepared for the question, answered it as if he was utterly unprepared for the question, immediately backtracks because I doubt he even knows what his position is.
Because he has no core principles.
And he probably doesn't. But what I think, people keep asking, is anything going to start hurting? No individual gaffe or moment, I think, does. I do sense, though, there is starting to be a cumulative effect because he's at a point in his campaign where he's close to the delegates, whether he gets enough to get to the convention or not. However, he's at a point where he's got it. If he then changes his pivots to a different position where he now says, I got my core people. Now I've got to convince people who are a little frightened of me, maybe you don't have to be frightened of me. Maybe I'm actually a little more sensible than you think. And he's either incapable of it or doesn't know how to do it. And so now he's, I think, even scaring some people who previously have been supporters.
I've done a 180 on Donald Trump, Dan. I think he's actually going to bring the country together. Because if you can take abortion opponents and those in favor of abortion rights and agree that they can't believe what Donald Trump said, I think you're going to bring the country together. I really do think people, and I think the problem is he has no core principles. And that's why Chris Matthews was able to bring him down that road so artfully, where he said something completely ridiculous, like penalizing women who seek abortions. But I think Donald Trump has been the drunk guy at the end of the bar. And we've all been at this party where, we've been laughing. Oh, the guy at the end of the bar, he makes a lot of sense because he's drunk and he's saying crazy things that we all may privately think one moment until we sober up. The problem is the lights of the bar are about to go on. And we're going to realize that the guy at the end of the bar isn't making any sense. And the question for Republicans as we head into convention is whether they're waking up in time.
And what do they do with it? Yeah, exactly, because he's going to have the most votes. I honestly believe the sad part of this is I think a lot of his supporters are more serious about what their concerns are than he is. I honestly believe the theory that he didn't really think he was going to go this far, and he has, and it has surprised him as much as anybody, and now he doesn't really know what to do with it. He doesn't know how to pivot. He doesn't really know how to become a quote-unquote serious candidate because he never really intended to be a serious candidate. He was riding a wave, basically. And now, are the Republicans, as you say, are they stuck with him as their way out? But I think now he's even starting to lose some of his own people because of the cumulative weight of all this.
His only hope is he has some issues around trade. If he can develop a campaign that is exclusively around trade, and that seems hard to imagine.
You know what's sad too, real quick?
Coming up on Enough Said.
And I got news, as a reporter over there, it's like pulling teeth to get someone to talk about what's actually happening. And I think the culture for a university, a public entity.
That's been like that for quite a while.
It has been out there, and that doesn't seem.
They're back. Gopher men's basketball players Kevin Dorsey, Nate Mason, and Dupree McBrayer will all return next season. They were suspended in February for violating team rules, but it was just after sexual pictures of Dorsey and a woman appeared on social media. Tom, you covered this story for us.
Yeah, and this story makes me sad and angry and confused all at the same time. Kevin Dorsey's a freshman, and the fact of the matter is young people do this kind of stuff. In fact, I think it's about 30% of all boys and a lesser number of girls
That's the percentage?
post pictures of sexual stuff online and send it to each other. The problem is the victimization of this woman. I mean, there's a strong correlation between this type of thing and domestic violence, using this as a threat. Now, for the record, Dorsey says his phone was stolen and that he didn't post that stuff, didn't report it stolen for days later. I think that defies credulity, quite frankly. But to let these guys back on the team, I don't know. Young people making mistakes like that, I guess so. But there was no criminal investigation. I wonder where this woman is.
Well, that's why that's the key to this. If as far as I was concerned, if there was no criminal investigation or no belief that there was any need to go criminally, I have no problem with them coming back. Would I recommend this? No. Do we have any sign that, have we been given any indication that the woman was not aware of the camera or was aware that this was part of the deal? To me, that's pretty key for the very same reason. Kids do lots of crazy things I wouldn't recommend. I think the original suspension was largely because the U is already under heat because of Norwood Teague and that scandal and then his ultimate dismissal. Because I'm not even convinced, I don't feel quite the same way as you do on this, unless we get information from that she was put in a position that she did not want to be in. That changes, obviously, the story completely.
Not only during the taping, but also whether she consented to it being put out on social media.
Well, the
legislature is considering a kind of revenge porn law in this whole area.
I think
we're
going to get to later, actually.
We may have this. This could be a criminal offense.
But based on what we know to this point, I have no difficulty. Again, I wouldn't recommend it. Kids do lots of crazy things, and I'm glad we didn't have the chance to do them, at least at my age. You're a lot younger than me, of course. But I'm not. I don't. There are some people who think they should not have come back at all. I don't buy that unless we get more info. And I'll ask you as the reporter, do we know? Have we gotten the question answered on whether his story on the cell phone, which is possible? We even got a confirmation, I think, at a store in Mall of America that his phone was stolen. That indeed it was stolen. Because that, to me, is another key component that's never been followed up on.
And I don't know. When I initially did the story, I knew that there was no criminal investigation to the posting of the actual video. I don't know about the stolen cell phone or not. And I agree. I think that's really key. And obviously the U has made a determination that from what they can see, he should come back. So, but my problem here is
Puritan about deciding what other people, because you know how that goes. We lecture other people what they should or shouldn't do in the privacy of whatever. And I know it didn't turn out to be private. But I'm not going to get too high and mighty about that. The only place I'm going to step in is if there's a sense that this woman was victimized beyond, as if she didn't know what was going on. I'm sure she didn't intend to have it out, but how did it come out? Because that's another key part of the story.
I agree totally. But I also have a problem with the transparency and the context this all appears in. I think we have a better understanding of how the Norwood Teague thing happened and how it was allowed to go on. I think there is a whole culture there at the U, especially in the athletics department, of secrecy and letting things play out that we just hope doesn't go public. And I got news, as a reporter over there, it's like pulling teeth to get someone to talk about what's actually happening. And I think the culture for a university, a public entity.
That's been like that for quite a while.
It has been out there, and that doesn't seem to change.
No, and it's not going to change unless they get the proper leadership in place with the athletic director. I have no faith, actually.
On that note, let's move on. Knocked out of the ballpark, Chicago, the latest city to ban smokeless tobacco at sports venues for fans and players. I contacted the twins, and since Target Field is a Hennepin County-owned building, they go by Hennepin County rules, which also bans all forms of tobacco use. What do you think of this movement against chew, Dan?
Well, here's the thing. There's nothing I hate more at a ball game than sitting next to a guy who's got the chaw and he's spitting into the cup, maybe narrowly missing my cheeseburger and my nachos. I hate.
Thanks for that visual.
I hate the whole thing. I set that all up though to say I will defend a person's right to use a legal product that isn't going to harm me. Smoking with a cigarette or cigar can harm me. We know that. Secondhand smoke. There's no such thing, I think, as secondhand tobacco juice ended up, somewhere in your body. So I don't like this trend. I don't like telling adults whether they can take a legal product. In this case, it is a legal product that's not going to hurt anybody else. But this is the trend. We'll see if it gets enforced, because that's another question. But I'm talking about both players and I'm talking about people in the stands. I don't get it.
So if we abandon the idea, Dan, finally, and I'm okay with this, that sports figures are somehow heroes or role models, because if we are, I have a different standard here. Because if we still think, if we're holding on to this precious, antiquated notion that they are somehow heroes and role models, then I think we have to talk about the 30,000 people who are diagnosed with oral cancer every year, the 9,000 people who will die of oral cancer. Half of them will die within 5 years. If we are holding on to this antiquated notion that we need to hold these individuals
For me, it is antiquated. Because for me, we pick and choose. We're frauds. How many stadiums, ballparks are named after beer companies? Right. How much beer flows? How much more dangerous can alcohol be? And we've all made the decision. We're going to be big boys and girls about it. And whatever examples are out there, parent your own children and guide them. And by the way, educate the heck out of them when it comes to the issue, the stats you just laid out. I'm 100% behind that. But the idea of then putting this all in the laps of ball players who could play very well, I just don't buy it. And by the way, the rules in Major League Baseball are already in place that when they're signing autographs, they're not supposed to be doing that in front of people. Yeah. You can't even do it at the minor league level. So to me, this is either we ban it, make it illegal to use it, or we say, I'm not going to, because your idea is what the folks behind this are saying. They're role models. How much more?
Welcome back to Enough Said. Let's talk about the danger of nerf wars. Students shooting each other with toy guns for prizes, sometimes while driving. Prior Lake High School's principal this week urging kids not to play the game after a crash killed 2 teens in Lakeville last year. And then Lakeville's mayor tweeting out, Matt Little, "Dear Prior Lake, our town has endured rough years, so our outcry is not one of anger, but of love and concern. I ask you to humbly end the game." Dan.
Well, boy, it was a tragic situation. There's no point about no question about it.
What happened in Lakeville?
In Lakeville, absolutely right. I guess could it be this simple? Am I oversimplifying it to say, can you convince kids to not do it while they're driving in vehicles next to each other on the road? Because can there be a worst case scenario as opposed to any of the other places that you play this game? I had no idea the Nerf games like this, gun games, had become that popular, that big. But look, every cautionary tale should be laid out there. But you know and I know. We were that young once. You do feel indestructible, and so I'm not sure this message is going to get through. You'd like to think it would, but the fact is we have evidence that's going to go on forever that sometimes kids are going to make really, really stupid decisions, and all you can do is try to send out the right messages and hope, but I don't think that necessarily means it's not going to stop it, whether it's this or something else.
It's one of those grace of God stories, like how did I get out of my teenage years alive and in one piece with my mind intact, and your heart just goes out to those parents because it just seems horrible, stupid, and it seems like kids should know better than to do this in automobiles that are deadly in a game that really is glorified tag. I just think it's tragic from start to finish.
And do we know how it got this big and how long it's been this big?
No idea. And apparently it is big. This is one of those things where you're like, oh, teenagers have this whole life that exists that I'm not aware of. Yeah. And so sad.
And like you said, any other place you could say, well, how dangerous could it be?
Yeah, and in a park, this is fun and innocent and fun, and it's great. Have a great time,
guys. Or whatever. But in cars,
jumping into cars, you'd think they'd know better. And after a tragic example like this, I hope they all do know better. But
and then we're back to hopefully parents. The message is going to have to be sent more than anything by parents. But even then, they're not always going to listen. That's the bottom line.
And you could have said that about 4 of the stories that we talked about today.
That's very true.
Okay, 100%. Let's go to the lightning round. Let's start with presidential candidate Donald Trump standing by his campaign manager after Corey Ladowski was charged with simple battery. He's accused of roughly grabbing a reporter. Let's go to you, Tom.
You're the reporter.
The circus that is the Trump campaign, denying that this happened, and then it is captured on video where I don't know if it's battery. He grabs her and pulls her back.
I wouldn't call him mauling.
I've had similar stuff.
I'm sure you've had tougher
I've had
stuff
a lot.
than that.
Yeah, absolutely. But she was loaded for bear. She works for Breitbart News. She's been on Twitter opposing him, Trump, from the start. So this is just the circus that is the Trump campaign. And, it's another example, but it's also an example of the Trump campaign willing to just obfuscate and lie. And this time they were caught on video.
The key word there is basically he said he didn't touch her.
Right.
He lied. And at that point, you just say, we got to get rid of this guy. But Trump, again, does not know when to cut his losses.
Because he's loyal, maybe that's one virtue,
part
right?
Of his signature. Yeah. But in this case, it ends up being stupid. By the same token, like I said, I don't think she was harmed.
It's hardly battery.
No.
Next up, the death of an icon, Oscar-winning actress Patty Duke passes away at the age of 69 this week. Thoughts, Dan?
Well, an Academy Award winner, as you say, and I was talking about this on the radio the other day, that she was in maybe the most underrated sports movie of all time that probably nobody saw. It was called Billy. This is in the mid-'60s. It turns into a female track star in the high school team that shows up all the boys because she listens to, when she runs, the beat.
Oh, I love that.
So the musical score is terrific. And they're talking about issues that we're still talking about to this day about equality for women, because she's supposed to be where? She's just supposed to be cheering on the boys in track. She wants to participate and perform. And how many years, decades later, we're actually still talking about some of the same issues.
Nice legacy to leave behind.
Very talented actress.
26 states so far have outlawed the so-called revenge porn. The Minnesota bill would make it a crime to post private images without the consent of everyone involved. Isn't this a no-duh, Tom?
I think so. And the testimony, at the legislature was really gripping. A woman who had this happen. I think she lost her virginity to a guy, and a week later he's posting this kind of video. This is destructive. It's a kind of extortion. I think it's closely related to domestic violence in terms of the dynamic that we're talking about. We have to outlaw this. I think it's a no-duh. I think it should be a felony.
It should be easy, but again, it's another example of just how different the world is in which we live, because I'm sure there was attempts to avenge previously, but not where you could do it as easily as you could online and literally change somebody's life forever.
Yeah, the problem is there's so many people who are, I believe this, they're not incorporating this into their sex
Absolutely
lives.
right.
Video,
That's true.
There are therapists out there, marriage therapists, that suggest couples incorporate this into
including some Golden Gophers, apparently.
So.
Next up, despite the loss to Ottawa, the Wild still on fire. Do they have what it takes to go all the way, Dan?
All the way to what? You mean the Stanley Cup?
Wherever they
winning
go,
it all?
wherever they're supposed to go.
Well, they're trying to get to the playoffs. They're still in good position on the playoffs, but last night's game was kind of indicative of the frustration. They're up, they're down, you think you're about to believe in them, and then they lay an egg against a very bad opponent.
They beat Chicago and then lose
to a team that's out of the playoffs. So the bottom line is, go into this postseason if they get in with your eyes open. Don't expect they're going to go very far, because this has been kind of a mess of a very frustrating year.
And finally, Shaquille O'Neal proposing to his girlfriend on Instagram. Now, he's known to be a jokester. He's proposed to Betty White before, so we're not quite sure if this is true. But if true, what happened to the good old-fashioned way of getting down on one knee, Dan?
Those days, I'm afraid, are over.
I think they are.
I think they're completely. I actually would have liked to seen the Shaq marry Betty White.
That would
have been a great
marriage made in TV
heaven.
Be
outstanding.
It would be.
Put them together on the road.
They'd be a nice couple, I think.
It'd be a lot of fun. But the days of being romantic, I think, are.
Yeah. What do you tell your kids one day? Oh, hey, Dad proposed to me on Instagram. Oh, that's sweet. Mom and Dad. I love that.